Good morning, Foothills. I'm Carrie Kinnigs, your Director of Kids Ministry, and here's what's happening around our church. Just a reminder this week, if you would like a few of the pastors or elders to pray with you and anoint you with oil for healing of any sort, according to James 5:14, please call the church office and we'll make that happen. Christmas is coming, and we'd love for you to grab an invite card and invite people to join us for the season. You can also scan that QR code on the screen and share our digital flyer via text or social media. Our classic Christmas service is December 24th at 11 a.m., followed by our main services at 1 p.m., 3 p.m., and 5 p.m. Kids are invited to join their families in service, and childcare is available for ages 0 to 3 at our 11 a.m., 1 p.m., and 3 p.m. services. Go to foothillscp.org/Christmas for all the Christmas details. Tinsel, lights, cookies, and gifts under the tree. These are just a few things that make Christmas special. Do you know a family who needs help to make Christmas special this year? Would you or your small group like to adopt a family this Christmas? Contact Jennifer at the church office. JHM New Year's Invasion is back, January 2nd through the 3rd. Get ready for a wild and crazy all-nighter for your junior hire. Games, food, prizes, and no sleep. What could go wrong? It's going to be a great time. Go to foothillscp.org/NYI to register. If you have mobility challenges or just need a hand getting to and from your vehicle on Sundays, our Senior Assistance Ministry is here to help. This will be an extension of the welcome team starting December 7th before and after each service. If you're interested in helping, go to foothillscp.org/serve or stop by the welcome booth to learn more. Do you have the Foothills app yet? You can find Foothills monthly, read the church blogs, watch past sermons, watch the live stream of our main services on Sundays, sync events to your calendar, and even do fill-in or freehand notes. Just search Foothills CP in the iTunes or the Google Play Store. And that's all I have for you today. Don't forget to silence your cell phones, and we'll see you out on the patio.
Good morning, friends. Welcome to Foothills. My name's Phil. I'm one of the pastors on the team, and it is a privilege for me to be able to worship with you in song and spend some time together as we worship God through the study of His Word. Thank you for being here. If you're a guest with us today, special welcome to you. If you're feeling bold, not too bold, but I would love to meet you after the service is over, just get to know your name a little bit and hear some of your story. It's always fun to learn what God is doing and what leads people here, all right? Before we go too far, I want to make sure I also welcome those who are joining us in the online community, whether you are around the corner or around the world. It's super good to have you with us as we spend time together wrapping up the Corinthians series. Last week, you may remember that we had a kind of a tender moment where we got to peek behind the curtain and really hear Pastor Dylan's heart about how much he hates boasters and how he wishes that they would foul up right in front of people and just learn a little humility. How God opposes the proud, so let's bring on the opposition. And you know, as I listened to you laugh inordinately long at that whole thing last time, it occurred to me that these folks hate bragging just as much as Dylan does. And this morning, you're going to see the word boasting in all its forms, even more than you did last week. You're going to discover just how much Paul despises it too. And you're going to see how Paul kind of gets backed into a corner, and he really has no choice but to boast like those super inflated super apostles. As we read through today's passage, you're also going to see the word foolishness and weakness all over the place. So it's going to be a morning of boasting, foolishness, and weakness. Should be, should be interesting because we're going to see Paul taking one more run at drawing the Corinthians back into a right understanding of the gospel and back into a right relationship with Christ. And to do that, he's going to take off the gloves, so to speak, and he's coming hard after the false apostles who have led them astray. Paul wants the Corinthians to understand that no matter what his opponents may say, that serving others may come at great cost, but we're called to magnify Christ and not ourselves as we do. That's our big idea this morning. So if you don't already have your Bible opened up to 2 Corinthians chapter 11, go ahead and get there. I'm going to be reading this morning from the ESV. We're going to look at the first 6 verses of chapter 11 together right now, so follow along, would you? Paul writes, I wish you would bear with me in a little foolishness. Do bear with me. For I feel a divine jealousy for you, since I betrothed you to one husband, to present you as a pure virgin to Christ. But I'm afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by his cunning, your thoughts will be led astray from a sincere and pure devotion to Christ. For if someone comes and proclaims another Jesus than the one we proclaimed, or if you receive a different spirit from the one you received, or if you accept a different gospel from the one you accepted, you put up with it readily enough. Even if I am unskilled in speaking, I am not so Indeed, I consider that I am not in the least inferior to these super apostles. Even if I am unskilled in speaking, I am not so in knowledge. Indeed, in every way, we have made this plain to you in all things. Paul's concerned that the Corinthians are being seduced by the slickly spoken lies of his opponents. Call them what you want. Super apostles, hyper apostles, false apostles, newcomers, whatever. They have arrived, and they have managed to lead some of the Corinthians away from the simplicity of the true gospel. The super apostles have presented a different gospel and ultimately a different Jesus. They're preaching the cross plus Mosaic law. Basically, they're teaching works righteousness instead of righteousness through faith in Christ alone. They're saying that to be right with God, a person needs faith in Jesus and to follow the laws of Moses. Friends, beware of anyone who teaches the cross plus anything else, because they're lying to you. Only faith in Jesus and what he accomplished through his life, death, and resurrection can save you. Anything added to that will not lead you to freedom, but to bondage. And that's why Paul is so fired up. He loves these Corinthians, and these deceivers are leading them away from Jesus. Now, the accusers, the opposers accused Paul of not being a trained professional speaker. You know, he's not a gifted lecturer, so clearly the message that he shares can't be from God. And Paul says, I may be a layman and you may be professionally trained speakers, but I know the one I'm talking about and you don't. Paul knows the gospel. He knows, and he has personally met the one who is the source of the message that he preaches. The super apostles can't claim that. They didn't meet Jesus face to face. Paul has. Now look at verse 7. Paul writes, or did I commit a sin in humbling myself so that you might be exalted, because I preached God's gospel to you free of charge? You're going to see this theme kind of woven throughout this morning. In Greek culture, professional orators would come and give TED Talks for money. Any speaker who had something of value to share welcomed the financial gifts from those to whom he spoke. And the hyper-apostles took full advantage of this in a couple of ways. First, they loved being elevated. They loved being publicly praised and respected so as to receive money for the message that they peddled. And they used the fact that Paul refused to be paid as evidence that Paul's message was weak, and so is he. Their position was basically, if he's not willing to be paid, you shouldn't be willing to listen. Paul was intent upon preaching for free because the gospel isn't for sale. It's not a product being sold or entertainment for hire. Paul, it was not a client of the Corinthians, but Christ's apostle to them. They think that Paul doesn't love them because he won't allow them to support him. But he loves them so much that he doesn't want them to think that the gospel came to them only because they were willing to pay for it. The super apostles, on the other hand, they loved taking their money because it proved their worth and it disguised their greed. Paul's unwillingness to take the Corinthians' money out of love, I love how he did this. Paul's unwillingness to take their money undermines his opponent's ability to demand payment and then say, oh, and we love you too. So in other words, you got Paul on one side saying, I just love you because I love you. They're like, well, give me some money. See, I love you. No. Paul's self-support highlighted his true motive. And he wasn't going to change that mode of interacting with them. In verses 13 to 15, Paul tells the Corinthians precisely who these super apostles who have come amongst them really are. Take a look at the text, 13 to 15. For such men are false apostles, deceitful workmen disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. Ooh. So it's no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. Their end will correspond to their deeds. In other words, they're going to get what's coming to them. But what they're doing is not coming from God. Don't be deceived. Don't let their disguise trick you. They do not speak the true gospel. They do not have your best in mind, and they do not love you. In verse 16, Paul writes, I repeat, let no one think me foolish, but even if you do, accept me as a fool so that I too may boast a little. What we have here is desperate times call for desperate measures. The Corinthians are content to listen to the foolish boasting of the super apostles as they try to prop themselves up and validate their ministry. So Paul, reluctantly, grudgingly, unwillingly, maybe with a little, you ever have that? Something just right. That's how Paul boasting. That's what boasting does to Paul. Okay? But he's willing to do it. I'm willing to boast a little for your sake. It's foolish. He recognizes how foolish it is because all it does is point to him and some of his experiences in life instead of calling attention to Christ as the giver of all things. But for their sake, he's willing to do it. He'll boast, but not to prop himself up. He'll do it for their sake and for the sake of the gospel that he preaches. So he proceeds. Look at the second half of verse 21 and following. He writes, but whatever anyone else dares to boast of, I'm speaking as a fool, I also dare to boast of that. So he's coming against what the false apostles are saying. I also dare to boast of that. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they offspring of Abraham? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I'm a better one. I'm talking like a madman. Don't get me started. Paul's on a roll, but you can tell that he's super uncomfortable with all of this. He doesn't want to do it, but he does it anyway. So think about just how much he must love them to boast foolishly. Just like the super apostles, he's willing to speak to them in a way they understand, and he's a Hebrew, just like they are. And he's part of God's chosen people as an Israelite, just like they are. And he's actually a descendant of Abraham. But he's a much better minister of Christ. You can tell. He's just uncomfortable. He's got to be, he even says in there, I'm talking like a madman. He's just kind of out of his mind to do this. he goes on to describe what makes him a better minister. The suffering that he has endured as he served Christ and others. That's what makes him a better minister. And he goes on to describe it. He's been through overwhelming labors and imprisonments and beatings and been close to death countless times. But setting all of that aside, you know what's worse? You know what causes deeper suffer for him and greater grief than all of that? The daily pressure that he endures as he aches for the welfare of the churches that Christ has called him to serve. He wants them to be whole and to be healthy. He wants them to be everything that Christ has called them to be, and it grieves him as he sees them getting sucked in and led astray. He knows what weakness is like. He identifies with their weakness. But what fires him up is what the false apostles are doing, and it breaks his heart. All that he suffered was to magnify Christ and make him known. The false apostles, they said that his weaknesses, his trials, his sufferings were indications that he's not really God's man. Paul is weak, not because of his own inadequacies, but because of his willingness to identify with those to whom he's been sent with the gospel. A true apostle is willing to suffer for his people as an ambassador of the crucified Christ. Paul serves the crucified and resurrected Jesus. If anybody knows suffering, it's Christ. And if Christ has called me to suffer that I might be his apostle to these people, so be it. His opposers, they're not going to risk themselves for others because they're motivated by their own self-interests. So they brag about themselves, their experiences, their virtue. Boasting isn't Paul's thing, but he's willing to be foolish for the sake of Christ and those Christ loves. You can hear it clearly from his heart in verse 30. He says, "If I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness." How good are you about bragging about your weaknesses? You know, the great American pastime of bragging about how you're weak? It doesn't happen. But once again, Paul is seeking to magnify Jesus, not himself, and he points to his own frailty and the Lord's amazing sustaining strength. Serving others comes at a great cost. And it can for us too as we serve. Now, we may not face shipwrecks and life-threatening beatings, but serving could cost you friendships, positions, popularity. Could cost you money. It's definitely going to cost you time and most likely some sleep. Serving others is going to cost you some comfort and some ease. And since it's so easy for us to kind of self-promote and self-protect and be self-consumed, we really have to pay attention and keep our priorities in check. Because it's easy for us to be busy about taking care of our kids and looking at our careers and investing in our marriages and trying to be healthy. Those are all good things. But Christ has called us as his people to make disciples. Am I right? How's that going for you? Some slow and steady. Others of you would be like, wait, make disciples? It's easy for us to get our priorities kind of twisted in the busyness of life, but Christ has called us not to be apostles, but we are called to be ambassadors. We're called to be his witnesses, and that is going to cost. You may not feel like you're up to the task. You may not feel like you got enough fuel in your tank. You may not think you've got enough skills or training. And that's okay. Because it's not about you. Take a look at chapter 12, verse 1. I must go on boasting though there's nothing to be gained by it. I will go on to visions and revelations of the Lord. Because his opponents bragged about their spiritual experiences along with their, ethnic identity, Paul is kind of forced to boast, even if it's foolish, about his visions and revelations. And he goes from there to describe what happened 14 years earlier. He was somehow taken up to heaven by God. And there he heard things that he's not permitted to share. He could brag about being taken up to heaven by God, to be with God, but why? Right? His ministry isn't to puff himself up like the false apostles. His ministry is to magnify Jesus Christ and share the gospel, whatever the cost. So he's not going to brag about his private, personal experiences, though it makes him awesome. Paul wasn't awarded this opportunity to be taken up to heaven by God because he was so spectacular. It was God's idea. So why am I going to brag about that? It's not about me, Paul says. That's why he's not going to brag about it. I mean, if you think about it, like just between you and me, getting taken up to heaven on a little preview journey to take a look at all, that'd be pretty cool. I mean, if there was maybe a little room for a little bragging, that could be one. Paul's like, nah. His humility is the exact opposite of what you see from the super apostles and what they're communicating. All they're talking about is their gifts and their talent and their visions and revelations and what makes them so impressive. Paul doesn't want anyone to think any more of him than what they see in him or hear from him. So what do they see in Paul? Weakness. That's why his opponents say he's sketchy. And what do they hear from Paul? The gospel. Weakness and preaching the gospel. That's what Paul wants them to think about. His weaknesses are the result of being a minister of Christ who suffers because he preaches the gospel. And his objective was to glorify Jesus, not himself. Friends, hear me. His objective was to glorify Jesus, not himself. May the same be true of us. Not me, but Jesus. The only boasting coming from Paul will be about his weaknesses so that Christ might be exalted. Yes. So take now a look at verses 7 to 10. Paul has just described this heavenly encounter that he had, and he continues. So to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Hold on to those words, the rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. So he describes this unbelievable heavenly experience. He can't talk about what he heard up there, but the language suggests that he had many revelations, even though he only kind of vaguely elaborates about this one. And then the pain came. Then came the pain. Paul was given by God a thorn in the flesh so he wouldn't become puffed up. Overinflated servants are not what Jesus is after. When we get puffed up, we forget who we're representing because it becomes like the super apostles, all about me. And in ways that only Paul can, somehow he manages to use this whole discussion about the thorn that he had so he wouldn't become puffed up as another opportunity to poke the super conceited super apostles. Scholars don't know what Paul's thorn was. Ideas and speculations range from spiritual to fleshly temptations to some sort of a physical appearance thing. Maybe it was epilepsy. Maybe it was an eye thing. Maybe it was headaches. We don't know. All we know is that Paul repeatedly asked Jesus to remove it. And while he was forbidden from sharing anything about that, what he heard in that heavenly encounter, there was no prohibition from him boldly declaring how Jesus responded to him as he repeatedly asked for the thorn to be removed. And Jesus said, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." That kind of power we only tend to appreciate while we're right in the middle of the struggle, right in the middle of the weakness. And that thorn that Paul had was his constant, concrete reminder of his weakness and his need, his utter need to continually lean into Jesus. Here's where it gets wild. I don't know about anybody. I've never met anyone who loves to go through tough times, who enjoys difficulties or invites suffering. But Paul considered this thorn to be a gift because it constantly reminded him of his need for the presence of Jesus and the power and the grace of Christ in his day-to-day. He would never trade it. Some of you, I'll talk about this in a minute. Some of you have been through tremendous stuff. But it's the second half of verse 9 that is the key here. He says, "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me." Remember, I told you to pay attention to that. That is language that reminds us of the Old Testament, where God talks about pitching his tent with his people. It's tabernacle language. We see something similar in John chapter 1, where the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We also see it in Revelation when God talks about making his dwelling among his people. He's talking about setting up camp, so to speak, taking up residence among us. Now stay with me. Paul is teaching that Christ in his power pitches his tent with us in our weaknesses. And he draws near to us and gives his grace and power to us in our weakness. That is why Paul said he will brag about being weak. Because his weakness is a platform upon which Christ displays his grace and power. It's on the screen. I'll say it one more time. Paul's weakness is a platform upon which Jesus displays his grace and his power. Christ meets him in the middle of the mess. Paul's weakness magnifies Jesus. That's counter to everything that we want to think. But that's the goal. Magnify Jesus. So think about it for just a minute. As a Christ follower, your weakness gives God the opportunity to set up camp with you, so to speak, and give you grace and power that you need. The grace and power you need. Power you don't have on your own. Strength that you don't have on your own. And you know what? That's great. That's just fine that you don't have the power or the strength, again, because it's not about you. And here's something else to consider. The text says, "My grace is sufficient." That's present tense. Right now, Christ's grace is sufficient for whatever you're facing. You may be going through relationship struggles or grief or problems with your kids, health issues, financial hardship. You might even have anxiety about whether your turkey's going to be dry this year. But his grace is sufficient. He will meet you in the middle. Many of you have endured tremendous pain and heartache. And if I asked right now, you would willingly stand up here and testify about how Jesus met you in the middle. Some of you have experienced some traumatic health issues, and Jesus lavished his grace upon you and was so close to you that you would never want to change the experience. You're actually grateful for having gone through it because Jesus in his grace was so unmistakably present and gave you all you needed to weather the storm. You want to talk about flipping it around. It makes no sense to the world that does not know Jesus or his love or his grace or his power. And that's exactly why in verse 10, Paul said, "For the sake of Christ then, I'm content with weaknesses and insults and hardships and persecutions and calamities. For when I am weak, then I'm strong." For the sake of Christ, he says. If it's going to magnify Jesus, I'll gladly endure it all. That's his perspective. And Paul says this because he trusts Jesus. And that's the bottom line. If he doesn't trust Jesus and he's going through this yuck, you know he's going to bail. I think any of us would do that. If you don't trust Jesus and things get tough, you're going to figure out some other way. I got to figure this out. It's easy for you to say that you trust Jesus when things are good. But you really get to know where your faith is when it gets bumpy and ugly, right? And you really get to know Jesus in some incredible ways when it gets bumpy and ugly. To be clear, Paul isn't boasting about being feeble or unprepared or suffering because of disobedience. He's talking about the struggles he's facing because he has said yes to Jesus and because he's walking in obedience. Christ has called us to himself. He's called us to a life of service, to share the good news, and to make disciples wherever we go. We got to keep our priorities straight, though, because it's easy to get things turned around and upside down. The call is for every believer. But when you've trusted Jesus and the struggles, the pain, the trials come, watch for him in his grace to draw close and to give you all you need. Your sufferings can never exceed God's supply of grace. Look at the last few verses with me, 11 to 13. Paul says, "I've been a fool. You forced me to it, for I ought to have been commended by you. For I was not at all inferior to these super apostles, even though I'm nothing. The signs of a true apostle were performed among you with utmost patience, with signs and wonders and mighty works. For in what were you less favored than the rest of the churches, except that I myself did not burden you? Forgive me this wrong." He circles back to the beginning, 11:1. He said, "Then I wish you would bear with me in a little foolishness," and now he says, "I've been a fool." It's one thing for Paul to be discredited, but it's a whole other deal, and he will not allow the gospel to be made ineffective by the deceit of false apostles. So he endures the distaste of self-justification and boasting. He didn't have a choice but to speak up to them in a language that they understood. They could have backed him up. The Corinthians could have backed him up and bragged about what Christ had done through Paul's ministry, but they didn't. I mean, it was because of Paul that they were on the receiving end of signs and works and wonders, and lives were changed, all clear indicators of an apostolic ministry, but they didn't go to bat for him. So Paul was forced into looking like a fool and boasting. not for himself, but to magnify Christ. His ministry to the Corinthians was rooted in love. Unlike the super apostles, he never enslaved or exploited or took advantage of or put on airs or slapped them in the face, either figuratively or literally. The only thing he did was make sure that he wasn't a financial burden to them. Sorry. I'm sorry I didn't burden you financially. If that's all you have, that's all you've got, the fact that I wouldn't charge you to preach the gospel, the fact that I worked hard so that you would know the message of Christ comes to you at no cost except the price that Christ was willing to pay to bring it to you? I'm sorry. Have you ever tried to do something nice for somebody and it just bites you? This is it. Right here. Paul suffered for loving them and doing the right thing. He gladly endured all the hardships, the persecutions, the insults, calamities, weakness, because in the middle of all those trials, the grace and power of Jesus Christ was on full display. People can say what they want. They can slander me, they can lie about me, make fun of me, ridicule, ignore, and mistreat me, but it's not about me. It's about Christ and his glory, his call, his sacrifice on our behalf, his purposes, his desires. It's not about me. So hold on to that, friends. It's not about you. It's about him. Serving others may come at great cost, but we're called to magnify Christ, not ourselves as we do it. Are you with me? Both of you, thank you so much. The rest of you, are you with me? All right, let's pray. Lord Jesus, I am so very grateful that it's not about me. Not about me trying to be good enough, fast enough, smart enough. Not about me having enough training. Not about me. There's place for having experience. There's place for study. There's place for all those things. But ultimately, it's about you. It's about magnifying you. And you will give us all we need according to your glorious riches, that we might have the ability to boldly proclaim the truth of the gospel, to make disciples. So I pray for myself and I pray for my friends, will we be people who are bold, confident, not in us, but in you, and then quick to obey, to do that which you've called us. May we boldly share the gospel. This week we're going to be with friends and family. Some family coming in from out of town, or maybe we're traveling, and there's people in our lives, in those circles, that need to know the truth of you. Give us the right words the right way. May we be your ambassadors. And Lord, as we celebrate with these friends and family, may our gratitude for all you are and all you've done just overflow, just so naturally, and lead to conversation about your goodness, kindness, and mercy. So bless these friends. And may we be people who very intentionally say yes to you moment by moment and trust you to meet us in the middle. We love you. And as always, we thank you for loving us first and best. It's in your strong, powerful, gracious name we pray together.